Hello and welcome to the Chartered Institute of Fundraising South East and London regions virtual First Thursday event where we have Howard Lake and Lucy Gower considering the future of fundraising. My name is Julia Ellis. I chair the South East and London Committee, and I'd like to say a big thank you to all the CIOF First Thursday volunteers who've been busily beavering away behind the scenes. We're all dedicated to promoting excellence in fundraising. Now, I'd like to address the elephant in the room. The Chartered Institute has been all over the news for the last few weeks regarding how complaints of sexual harassment have been handled, and Head Office has prepared a statement that I will read to you now. Our Board of Trustees have acknowledged that the Chartered Institute can do better and apologised for its failings. The trustees have agreed and published actions based on the findings of an independent learning review that was commissioned in December 2020. They've agreed a way forward with clear and accountable actions, and it confirms the Institute's determination to ensure that the fundraiser community is a safe place to work, network and learn. Speaking in a personal capacity, I would like to reassure you all today that I have complete confidence that this really important issue is being addressed, and that I and my fellow chairs are committed to keeping it on the agenda. Back to today's event though, please do tweet about it using the hashtag CIOF Thursday, and please also tag the speakers at Howard Lake, at Lucidity Says, at Lucy Innovation, and us at CIOF SE London. Got to short that sometime. We will be recording this morning's event, so please do anonymise yourself if you so wish. There aren't really any other rules as you're on mute. Please ask questions via the Q&A function, not the chat function. Then we will see them. We'll try to get through as many as we can. So our speakers don't really need any introduction, but I'm going to do so anyway. So Howard Lake, as we all know, is the most amazing digital fundraising entrepreneur. He has published UK fundraising like forever, and helps charities and fundraising businesses use digital to help them raise more money. He's co-founder of goodjobs.org.uk and also wrote the world's first how-to book on digital fundraising. Meanwhile, he spent lockdowns playing the piano and tackling on fundraising tips on Fundraising Tune of the Day. Lucy Gower used to be my mentor, and so I have first-hand experience of how awesome she is. She is founder and director at Lucidity and an accomplished consultant, coach, facilitator and global speaker. She is also best-selling author of The Innovation Workouts. Lucy has spent lockdown supporting people's learning, development and well-being through the Lucidity network and being PA to a demanding fox terrier called Gary. So that was a lot of speak from me. I do apologise. And I'm now going to hand over to the main event, the wonderful Howard and Lucy.
Thank you, Juliet.
Thank you. Very good morning to everyone. Thank you very much for joining us, Lucy and I. We're going to, I'll first say hello to Lucy from a distance. Hello, Lucy, how are you?
Hi, Howard. I'm good, thank you. How are you? I heard you had your jab yesterday.
I did. I had my first vaccination yesterday, so I am very happy. And even better, I have had no ill results as a result. So I am firing on all cylinders and very, very pleased about it. And I turned it into a fundraising opportunity. So I donated because I'm so happy and slightly safer. So I decided to donate, and that's what anyone can do. So if you've had your vaccination and are feeling quite happy about it, you might want to donate to one of the various causes that are fundraising as a result, including the WHO COVID-19 Solidarity Response Fund. So I donated to help at least one other person get their vaccine. So I feel doubly better. And I think there's a third presenter somewhere. Is that true?
There's a third presenter, and he's worked extremely hard helping me with the content today. Is my dog Gary. He's currently having a little nap in his bed, but he might join us for the Q&A in a little bit. But if anyone wants to check out Gary, he has more Instagram followers than me. He's Gary Gower, Dog Diaries. He's been keeping people happy through lockdown with his always cheerful and slightly disparaging of his PA, that's me, posts on Insta. So you can check him out there, but hopefully you'll meet him later. I'll just give a caveat: if the postman comes, we might hear from Gary. If another dog barks in the street, we might hear from Gary. So apologies in advance.
Fabulous. Okay, you're here to try and to see what we've got to say about where fundraising might be in 5 or 10 years' time. That's pretty hard. Any thoughts, Lucy?
So yeah, when we were asked to come and present this, I got really excited, and then I was like, oh, but we just don't know. Actually, we don't have a crystal ball. I wish that we did. And thinking that we would know what would happen in 5 or 10 years' time, or even in 1 year time, if we think about, you know, where we were this time last year. We don't have a blueprint for you today. We don't have a silver bullet. We don't have a roadmap. So first up, apologies if you're there waiting to write down exactly what you need to do in order to know where fundraising is going to be in 5 to 10 years' time. It's more important, we believe, about being ready for the unknown. So being able to manage uncertainty, so being able to be flexible in responding to things, being brave to try new things before they're even perhaps popular, being agile. And today we're going to give you some practical tips to help you to do that. So you'll come away with some practical things. And I think the thing to bear in mind as we are talking, and just generally in terms of this topic of being able to predict the future, is that the world has never moved so fast, and yet it will never move so slowly again. And it's more about how we are preparing for that than knowing exactly what the end result looks like.
Okay, and I have to say, I've noticed the date today, Lucy, 1st of April, and it is before midday, isn't it?
It is. So I'm just wondering if we're being set up here. We're not going to talk about growing spaghetti on trees, that's for sure.
No pranks from us, I promise. Okay, so we've just done our quick introduction, but we want to hear about you and where you are in terms of being ready for the unknown. How far ahead are you planning? So I've got a Slido poll just to find out, which you're welcome to take part in. If you've got a separate phone or another device, or you can open a new window. Thank you, Damien, in the chat. Gift aid, that would be lovely. Slido.com, and then type in the code #15801, and then just tell us how far you, your fundraising team, your charity is realistically planning ahead for fundraising. And we'll see live. And don't worry, it's all anonymous. You just get the overall stats, and you can see them developing now. So Slido.com, 15801. Thank you very much indeed for all that. We'll have a quick look at these. It's like a horse race, isn't it? At the beach, all those kind of old machines of penny machines, horse racing. Who's in the lead? Well, 12 months, it's all the shortish term, isn't it? So yeah, this is realistically planning, particularly in the context of the last 12, 15 months. Okay, we've got 48 people already. I think we can take some lesson from that. Lucy, any thoughts on?
So I think that it's not surprising that the majority of half of you are just looking at the next 12 months. I don't think there's a right or a wrong here, but I think that it's a mix of keeping your eye on why you exist in the first place, why your organisation exists, and what problem you're raising money to solve. But then I think within that, it's if you're only ever responding to the next few months, 12 months or less, that is extremely stressful. It can be really tough in terms of our own resilience, that we're just constantly responding. If anyone has that feeling of being in a hamster wheel, that's what you get when you're just responding to what's going on. So it's a mix of responding to what's happening in the moment, but also looking towards the horizon as well. And there's not one single right answer. It depends on your charity, how big you are, the resources that you have, and what you exist to do. But having a mix of both short and long term is going to be important, so you don't miss opportunities.
And just to help you, or this is our kind of get out of jail free card, there's a really great quotation about how difficult it is to make predictions, especially about the future. But what that also indicates is that no one knows who actually said it. It's been attributed to all kinds of people. So Lucy and I thought that if we can't even decide or agree on the past, how on earth are we going to make accurate predictions for the future? So that's our kind of our escape route. But lots of things change quickly. We know that from the past year, and that makes it really hard. But sometimes some of them are obvious and some of them are less so. So I've got a quick exercise for you now. I'm going to ask you, and if we'd all had our video screens up in one go, it might be fascinating to watch everything. So we'll do this in the chat. But I'm going to ask you, and very soon, to do the first thing that comes to mind when I say make the international sign of a phone call, just with your hand and fingers. So I'm going to get you to do that in 3 seconds and keep it there when you've done that. So 3, 2, 1, go. What's the hand sign for making a phone call? Okay, Lucy, how would you do that?
So I would do this.
Yep, me too. I would normally do that, but I also know there's a whole bunch of people who are just a little younger than us, perhaps, who do this, because that's the phone they use. This is very old-fashioned. That is where everyone else is. So if you, just to try and demonstrate that in the chat box, I'm going to say, if you acted like Lucy and I would have done, really, do you want to just type in Lucy as your response? And if you were the younger crowd, dare I say, and you did a palm. Oh, good. Lots of very experienced fundraisers I see in the chat box. If it's the palm, then just type in Howard. A whole bunch of people going for the Lucy approach. Oh, with thumb and little finger. Okay.
Oh,
yeah. Variations.
yeah.
But what this shows, to some extent, is that it hasn't really changed for us. But I can guarantee you, because I read it in Wired magazine, so it must be true, that there are plenty of people that now use that as the symbol of making a phone call, because that's how they hold their phones and their mobile devices. So things change quickly and not always obviously.
And I think
Sorry, in the chat, Lucy, Edgar says the Childline logo was changed from a traditional phone in 2016 because young people didn't recognize it as a phone. Brilliant, great example, Edgar, of a charity responding to these changes.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the thing around this as well is that you know, if I'm here doing this, but my donors are doing this, the analogy there is that we're talking a different language, and you can get a disconnect in terms of building rapport. You can get a disconnect in terms of what it is that your supporters, your volunteers, your audiences are looking for. So if your audience are changing, but you're not, then this is where you're going to kind of come up against some challenges. So the next slide that is sitting beautifully behind Howard, I call it the early adopter graph. I'm sure that many of you will be familiar with this sort of curve. This is or sometimes gets called an innovation curve, but basically for any new product, any new service, anything that is coming new into a market. So it might be a fundraising product, a fundraising event for you. This graph shows how people take it up. So the first people to get on side are your innovators and your early adopters. And this is the place, if we're thinking about what fundraising needs to look like or will look like in 5 to 10 years, is where you need to be looking. If you're looking at the orange or the red bars, the early majority or the late majority, now you've probably missed the boat in terms of looking to the future. So it's not about looking necessarily at what your charity or your supporters are doing, and it's not necessarily about looking at it's about looking outside of the not-for-profit sector. It's about looking at trends in the world in general, and then looking at, well, what needs are those meeting, and which are the ones that we're going to start to look at in a bit more detail to see if we can make it relevant for our supporters, our donors, our volunteers. So it's looking.
I'm just going. Sorry, Lucy. I'm just going to. I've just spotted that some people can't see the slide just because it's behind me. So I'm doing a bit of speaking so that people can have a quick look at the slide, and then I'll pass straight back to Lucy.
Does the slide only come up when you're speaking? This is good testing and learning. So yeah, the only way that you're going to know is by testing. It's by testing things. So there's some sites that I recommend, and you might have some that you look at too. I look at Springwise. And I look at PSFK, and we will share some of those links in the chat box. But it's looking at everything that's happening in the world and where there's emerging trends. That's where you need to be looking. And that can feel scary because often emerging trends are not familiar. and I often talk about Airbnb as being a product of before its time. So it was invented back in 2007. And I remember having conversations with people about, why would you go and stay in someone else's house? That can't be safe. Why would anyone go and do that? And then it took about 10 years for Airbnb to be mainstream. I'm going to anticipate that many of you have stayed in an Airbnb and rented your place out as a Airbnb. So it's, you know, back in 2007, it would have been looking at what Airbnb were up to get onto that emerging trend. Who knows what's going to happen to them now with what's happened over the last year, but it's looking at what's emerging, not what is currently happening, in order to think about where you'll be in 5 to 10 years time, by the time the early and late majority get on board.
And Lucy, I spotted you got mention of reference to tech enthusiasts there. Does the adoption curve apply just to technology, or does it have a broader application, social, economic, political?
Great question. So I think that this model evolved from a tech model, but it doesn't just apply to tech. It applies to anything where you have something new that you want people to buy, get involved in, take up. The curve looks the same across all sectors and all types of product.
Yeah. Great. Talking of early adoption and unexpected directions of change and positive support, I'm just going to flag this up from, I think, just last month. You will probably have spotted the astonishing Reddit group campaign, the Wall Street Bets group, who tried to achieve, take down to some extent hedge funds, or at least compete with Wall Street for individual investors. Well, actually, that resulted in a massive charitable gift. So I just want to suggest there are always new movements of people doing it for themselves, sometimes with new financial instruments, which is quite exciting. So what happened was it actually ended up, they have benefited one charity, the Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund, who say that they normally get about 20 adoptions for gorillas each weekend. But the Reddit investors together use their money to donate to them, and in 6 days, slightly longer than a weekend, they adopted 3,600 gorillas. So there are these moments, and I absolutely accept. I mean, Lucy, I think you commented that this was quite like the no makeup selfie and the ice bucket challenge. Very, very difficult to replicate, and really you shouldn't try to do that. But there are these opportunities and these groundswells, these movements, sometimes temporary, sometimes going forward.
And that absolutely comes back to looking at what's going on outside. So I don't know if anyone's here from Cancer Research or Macmillan, but I heard a story that Macmillan was so cross that Cancer Research really optimized income from no makeup selfie. They had a team that was about scanning horizons and looking for emerging trends so they could jump on it as quickly as possible. So when Ice Bucket Challenge started to emerge, Macmillan were there first. If anyone wants to if anyone knows more about this than me and wants to pop in the chat box, then please do, or to flag at the end.
So I think what we do know is that while there often seems to be nothing new in fundraising, and that's a good thing, I think just getting the basics right consistently, and not just right, but dealing with them in an excellent way, is a really good objective. I'll give you this quote that suggests, while there is nothing new under the sun, there are new suns. And I think given the rate of change that Lucy referred to at the beginning of the session, I think that's the position we're in now.
Yeah. So what I find is that we all make assumptions, and one of the things that stops us looking forward and looking to the future is the assumptions that we make. So we all make assumptions. That's fine. That's how our brains work. It's a bit of a shortcut. And all the experiences that we have help to form our ways of thinking and the assumptions that we make. If you've read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, he talks about this in terms of, which is a book I massively recommend from a fundraising perspective, about what makes people tick and how people think. But he talks about system 1, or autopilot, and that's how we're efficient. We make shortcuts and we make lots of assumptions. And as we get older, we follow the same thinking patterns over and over again, and they get more entrenched, which inhibits us. Which inhibits us from looking at the future and things that perhaps we don't know yet. I'll come back to the, thanks Matt, I'll come back to the book reference. I'll make sure I put everything in the chat box before we finish. So we all make assumptions, and that's fine, but it holds us back. We make assumptions about our donors, about our supporters, about our teams. And the only way to find out whether something is an assumption or not is to test it. I've got 3 of my favourite assumptions that I've heard over the years. The first one was sitting at a table at a big charitable organisation talking about new income streams, and they didn't have a lottery, and somebody suggested, oh, we could do a lottery, and someone fairly senior said, our donors wouldn't like that. No, we wouldn't do that. Thankfully, the charity tested it. Last year, they brought in 100k from lottery income that, as far as I'm aware, didn't cannibalise any other income streams. So big assumption. This time last year, I'm sure lots of you would have been party to. It's not possible to work from home. We can't raise money working from home. Well, we've disproved that. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it hasn't been a tough year, but it is possible to deliver working from home. And then my final one, before Howard is going to give you another Slido, so I want you to start to think about some of the assumptions that you make, is who'll go to a virtual carol concert? Well, it turned out for Shelter, 18,000 people did, which is significantly more people than would have fitted into Martin in the Fields, which is where they would normally hold it. So let's have a think now about, I've given you 3 examples. What assumptions might you be making about your fundraising? Again, these are anonymous, not looking for a right or wrong answer, but it's almost, once you can start to open up about some of the assumptions you might be making, then it's easier to question whether they are assumptions that are worth testing or not.
So do join in again. So it's at slido.com and the same number, hashtag 15801. You just get, these are really just sort of words. So we're going to build up a word cloud to see if there's any sort of repetition of words. I think you actually could have maybe even 2 words, possibly 3, if in a little phrase. So we'll start to see them coming up. Yes. So some of them will be presented differently. Yeah.
Great. Yeah.
And after a while, yes, there we go. So we start to see the more commonly occurring ones, and there is going to be probably no surprise with that one. Not least now everyone else has seen it.
And is it we're assuming our donors have fatigue, or is it that we're assuming that we've got fatigue? Our donors aren't digital. It's impossible. Yes, I hear so much. Oh, that won't work. It's impossible. This is great stuff. Pandemic support, regular giving is dying. Yeah, for some organisations that could be the case, but others not so. Depends on your donors.
Some really good stuff here. What we'll do, we'll keep a copy of this and we'll share this result after via the group.
So
some really good stuff.
Sorry, Howard, you go.
I was just going to completely change the subject and say thank you to Paul in the chat, giving a link to the Daniel Kahneman book and to the Hive version, which is very good. So definitely not Amazon. So well done, Paul. Thank you.
Great. And Shelley's written about the six thinking hats is another really good way of helping to challenge assumptions.
Brilliant. Lots of feedback there. Conscious of time, so what we'll do, we'll say thank you very much for that. I'll keep, you're welcome to carry on adding in there if you want, and we'll share the final results just to see what we all think are the biggest assumptions.
So my one learning point I want you to take away from this bit is that start to notice your assumptions. Next time you say, oh, that wouldn't work, or we wouldn't do that, just start to notice and ask yourself the question, or the team that you're working with, what assumptions are we making about this? Are we right to be making that assumption, or should we test that out before we write something off that could be the thing that is the deal breaker or the game changer for our fundraising in 5 to 10 years' time?
So you did actually come here wanting to know, with any luck, some advice or maybe some insight if you're really lucky. So we came up with just some ideas, treating this seriously. What will have changed, or what can we hope will have changed, or rather, possibly, what change can we drive in the next 5 years? So I'm going to suggest something that I would hope to or expect to see, but it won't happen on its own, is that fundraising will look and sound different in lots of different meanings of that. In particular, fundraisers, you, me, and others will look and sound different. We know there are efforts to broaden the appeal to the group, to the profession, and to the activities. and make it easier to enter and more attractive to more people. So I'm hoping that in 5 years, all of us, the group of fundraisers, will look and sound different. At the same time, as a result, so that we don't recruit and focus on effectively recruiting in our own image in terms of donors, that donors will look and sound different. There are many donors we are not reaching. We are not offering the opportunity or making it relevant to enough donors, enough of the population. So I'm hoping current activities will change that, and we'll mention those very shortly. But one thing I will say is what will have changed is what has already changed. This is going to be the strongest, most resilient generation of fundraisers. So all of us who've been through the last year have learned things that no other fundraisers have learned in a comparable position. So hard and horrible as it's been, you are a very strong group of fundraisers who will go on to achieve good things. So I will take leave on that positive note of what I think has already changed and will affect future change. Lucy.
Thanks, Howard. And in a slightly different context, when you were talking about fundraising looking and sounding different, sound in itself, voice giving in itself is now a channel, a viable donation channel. I'm seeing some work that the RNIB is doing around Alexa tapping into radio ads, and again, I think that we're starting to get to the early majority here. I remember going to a conference by one of the guys that I mentioned earlier in terms of that trend spotting about 5 years ago, and they were talking about use of Alexa and use of sound as a channel in and of itself, not just for charities but across all businesses. But I just want to talk about a couple of examples where I have seen a really great response. And I suppose it's just thinking about being able to respond to uncertainty and to be able to work quickly in order to be able to seize opportunities. So the first one is the Big Issue. Oh my goodness. The Big Issue changed their business model overnight. So Big Issue is vendors selling copies of the magazine on the street to raise money for their own income. Lockdown, no one's on the street. Overnight, they changed their model to a subscription model, and you can earmark funds to your particular vendor. Now, I don't know what was on the inside, those inside conversations around that, but what I'm seeing from the outside is really fast response and a really quick way of changing in order that they can still provide the services and the support that they need for the people that need them. The other people is Chaz. So if there's anyone here from Big Issue or Chaz, please, if you've got anything else to add, pop into the comments. So that's children's hospices across Scotland. Again, overnight, they changed their hospice at home service where they were doing storytelling and even the virtual clown doctor. For me, one of the things they did was really engage with supporters, involve them in solving the problems, which has created a really excellent supporter experience and people much more engaged with the organisation. The thing around both of these that I think that I want you to take away is that they moved really fast and responded to what was going on. No decisions by committee. I know some organisations that have taken years to even get, something like text giving set up. If you are one of the charities that has been able to work differently and move faster because of the COVID situation, blueprint that process and make sure that you don't go back to how we do things here once things go back to this thing that we're talking about called normal, because you'll need that agility as we move forward.
Very good advice. Thanks, Lucy. Also, another way is tracking and seeing how far we have come. So in 5 years' time, will we have resolved the need for campaigns like these, Charity So White, non-graduates welcome, and show the salary? Will they have been resolved? There may be new ones on top. The world doesn't stop, of course. But that would be one guide. Have we actually improved the way we fundraise, who fundraisers are? If you had been coming here hoping that digital was going to be the solution, I hope we've put your mind at rest that it really isn't. Digital is a great solution, but it also has its own challenges. And this is one of my favorite quotations. Basically, if there's any weaknesses or breakage within your organization, digital is just going to highlight it and probably make it worse. So I think that ought to be sort of tattooed on pretty much every fundraising or fundraiser's desktop. I'd say office, but obviously that's not appropriate now. So on our desktop. Is this easy? No, absolutely not. So working out what's coming in the future, preparing for it and influencing it is hard work, and no one really knows how to do it well. So I'm reminded of this great quote from Vincent van Gogh saying, "I'm always doing what I cannot do yet in order to learn how to do it." That is our lives from now on, if it hasn't been that already. It's hard, and anyone that claims to know how to do it is probably wrong. So Lucy, should we sum up?
Yeah, and on that, I think that attitude and approach of, I don't know how to do it, but here's the problem I'm solving, so I'm going to try a whole bunch of ways that I don't know how to do yet, is more the mindset rather than tinkering around the edges. So our hunches are, don't assume the fundraising model as we know it will continue. Already we're seeing things, you know, millennials rolling up their sleeves and getting hands-on because they're more interested in seeing the impact than writing a check, which is what some of our more established donors might prefer to do. And on that, I've got a quick story for you. A few years ago, a chap called Ben contacted me, and you know, I do a lot of work around innovation for charities, so lots of people would get in touch and say, oh, I'm thinking about developing an app, a fundraising app. And Ben wanted to do this because he wanted to raise money for a charity that had supported his recovery after being diagnosed with a brain tumor. And he wanted to give something back to the charity world and to make an impact. The app never really got off the ground, and a few years later I connected back with him again because he was heading up a fintech startup in Canary Wharf called Level 39, where entrepreneurs and startups to do with finance were testing and failing lots of different ideas. One of the projects that he was working on and supporting was enabling people in poor communities across the globe to get access to finance so that they could fund developing farming, education, some of the real basics that they needed to survive. And I remember him saying to me, he said, Lucy, where do I think I can make the most difference? Is it tinkering around the edges, developing an app and doing some fundraising? Or is it really getting to the root cause of some of the big systemic problems on the globe that I can have an impact in helping more people? It's up to you. You choose where you're going to focus your energy. So that model of giving money to a charity may in and of itself not be something we're seeing so much in 5 to 10 years' time as people get to the root cause of solving the problem themselves.
Absolutely. It's a challenge. It's an opportunity, but also a challenge to the way we currently work, which is good. I'd add a second comment of just doing the day job has been a struggle. And if we've achieved that over the last year, that's a pretty good win in its own. But still, the problems pile up, not least climate crisis. So we do really need some of us to stop wading in the weeds, to look up to the bigger problems. It's so much easier said than done, I get that. But we do have to be able to look for how we can transform giving and boost the impact. Smarter giving, bigger giving, it's really, there's lots of various options. So usually it's either outside experience, maybe adopting a new approach from outside the charity sector, which comes from Lucy's earlier comments, or from within, that's us, and spotting blockages that stop people giving, prevent people giving, or giving as much as they could or that they want, and working out how to unblock those. Again, so much easier said than done.
Oh yeah, everything we're talking about here is easier said than done. We didn't say at the beginning, this stuff is difficult. But our final hunch and our final bit of advice before we open up for questions is that you drive where fundraising might be in 5 to 10 years' time. And it's remembering that fundraising is the means, not the end. So, you know, your charity was set up because there's a big problem that needs solving. Your bravery, your courage, your ability to act quickly and test different ways of solving the problem, not necessarily different ways of fundraising as we know it now, but looking outside of the sector, looking at those emerging trends and having the courage to test better ways to solve the problem is down to you and the teams and the partners that you work with. Often I say to charities, you know, how much money do you need to raise to put yourselves out of business to solve the problem that you exist to solve? The question might not be about how much money you need to raise, it's what do you need to do to solve the problem that you exist to solve?
a very good point on which to end. I'll say that the privilege of being able to spout on this session should come with some responsibility. So I will mention a little bit of tech that holds us to account, or lets you hold us to account. So anything that we've said, we'll try and post some tweets about this today, and then you can use this Twitter account, remind me of this, which will actually remind you, and probably us in 5 years' time, whether we were accurate or not. So feel free to check up on us in 5 years' time. I'm going to say thank you so much for coming this morning, for spending your time with us. I really hope we've given you some ideas, and I really look forward to the conversation. These are our contact details. I will give Lucy the last word.
Oh, my goodness. Thanks, Howard. It's been great working with you, Howard. I run quite a lot of free webinars, training, things around innovation and creativity. I'm going to pop my newsletter link in the chat if you want to be the first to know about it. You can sign up to it, and I also have a free Facebook community that you can go to for help and advice about everything that we've been talking about today. It's a bit like Fundraising Chat, but a bit smaller, so I'll put the link in the chat as well. If you'd like to come and join us over there, we would love to have you and help you. Thank you, and that's my last word.
Okay, over to Paul and the committee. Thank you.
Charlotte, you're going to manage the questions?
Yes, I can help you all there. I'm sorry, I'm going to keep my video off just so that people don't have to look at me, because I think it's much more helpful to see Howard and Lucy. So the first question that's coming from an anonymous attendee. It says, I'm interested in asking the participants why it is that the majority are only planning 12 months ahead. Fear of change, budget limitations?
So is that asking other people, is that asking me and Howard, or is that asking people who are watching?
I suppose a bit of both. I suppose, could you speculate on that? And anybody that wants to jump into the chat and talk about maybe some of their perspective on this would also be really great.
Great. I can say what my opinion and views. What I'm seeing with my clients is that everything a year ago, everything got turned completely upside down, and it's almost like we had to start again. You know, events not happening. Who knew what was going to happen with COVID? So the planning cycle became much shorter than normal, perhaps sort of 3 months with regular check-ins, because it's felt so uncertain that any bigger than that is challenging. I think it's so much change going on that being able to look any further into the future has been very difficult. Capacity, resources, you know, with loads of change going on in teams, people in and out of furlough. I know many charities are having restructures and a lot of things changing with their sort of personnel. And so any longer than 12 months has just felt like a step too far right now. That's what I'm seeing. Howard, what about you?
I'm just watching the chat group as well. So Sharon has just pointed out some of the things that may be contributing to that. Capacity, energy, and uncertainty around the economy will have an impact on the shorter planning strategy. Yeah, I'm not saying it's the best approach. It's probably one of the most practical approaches at the moment, as long as the organisation can see and still maintains its sort of broader or longer term objectives. But yes, I think change is so rapid, and the limitations placed on us all and on supporters at the moment means I can quite understand a short 12, 24 months focus for the moment, but it shouldn't, I would suggest, last longer. But yeah, some good comments going on in the chat group, which is great.
Yeah.
Excellent. And then the next one's got also from an anonymous attendee, and I think this links back to what you mentioned about Black Lives Matter and non-graduates welcome movements. How do you think the impact of inequalities of diversity in fundraising will impact the sector over the next 5 to 10 years?
I can start and say my opinion. So how do I think the impact of inequalities? I think that it has the potential to disconnect a lot of donors and supporters. I mean, there's already this movement to feel like, you know, charity's so white. It's like that the wrong power dynamic. rather than working in partnership in order to solve problems. It's like perhaps a privileged few helping the people who are not so privileged. It's not quite the right language, but that's the kind of, if that dynamic continues, I think that it's going to be really detrimental for charities in terms of being close to their beneficiaries to be able to see what really the best sort of help is. And it's going to be detrimental to the beneficiaries, potentially detrimental in not getting the support that's required, or the right sort of support. But I'm interested to hear what other people think about that. Howard?
I just add, if it all depends if they're dealt with. I mean, the astonishing efforts going on to tackle this, to get charities, individual fundraisers, consultants like me, all involved to tackle this, acknowledge it, and work out practical solutions. If that's not dealt with, or if it is just modest changes, then it will damage the sector. It'll damage, not the sector, but it'll damage what charities are trying to achieve. So that is the impact. I mean, it is essential to tackle, and to tackle not in 5 or 10 years time, but now. So yeah, I welcome the efforts to make that change. I can't tell you the scale of the impact, but if it's not dealt with, I can simply obviously say it's going to limit the sector in its achievements.
Excellent. No, and I think that's something also the Chartered Institute firmly agrees with you on. Next question is from Emma Lowe. Hi, Emma. It feels like it was years ago, though it was only a couple of weeks ago, that you and I were running a very similar event on personal development and career development in fundraising. So hi and welcome back. Emma says, as a fundraising consultant committed to small charity growth and sustainability, I see a huge amount of innovation at grassroots and micro charity level. What are your thoughts or observations on this topic? And is enough being done to learn and take models from the small and micro charity sector? Fantastic question, Emma.
It is. Do you want to go first, or shall I go?
Well, you go first.
Okay. If anyone else wants to come in, or if the committee members want to join in, I'd welcome that. Yeah, absolutely right, Emma. Thank you. Is that being transferred to bigger charities? I don't know as a general idea. I'm sure lots of it does. I think all I can point to is the huge collaboration, particularly in the past year, the wonderful work of Furloughed Fundraisers chat group, the existing fundraising chat, initiatives like Sophie, which have been around a long time, the ability to share content or share ideas and lessons from large, small, experienced, inexperienced fundraisers, I think and charities is fantastic. Is it being shared effectively? That I don't know. And I wish, Emma, you were here. We could chat and you could tell us some of your ideas.
Yeah.
About that.
Yeah.
Lucy?
I think that smaller grassroots charities are great at innovation. They're less likely to have lots of sign off. They're more likely to be almost have a burning platform. If we don't raise this money, what does our existence look like? More so than some of the larger organisations that perhaps have more reserve. So I agree. I see a lot of grassroots innovation. There probably isn't. My hunch would be there isn't being enough done to learn and take models, perhaps because they're not known or seen, because you're just busy doing it and getting on with it. Not enough time to put it on Sophie because we've got the next thing that we're doing. That's it. No, there's not being enough done. I think there's a huge amount to learn from small micro charities, and I suspect that that's not being channeled as effectively as it could be.
Emma has joined in with the comment, which is great. Thanks, Emma. So saying that what she finds very few small charities have fundraisers, so they don't know what Chartered Institute fundraising and others can exist. Yeah, I agree. I mean, and even if they were fundraisers, they may not even call themselves fundraisers. I think we know that for years. I've come across that. So many people who have fundraising responsibility that do not consider themselves fundraisers. So yeah, sorry, I'm throwing loads of questions rather than answers. I don't have an answer.
I feel like this could be a session unto itself,
yes.
where we specifically get grassroots charities to come and talk about their models and maybe kind of, see and learn from them. I think, maybe that's something we need to look into.
Great idea.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And so then next we have a question from Martin, who is, it's not just about planning for things within the next 12 months, but also having a plan A, B, and C plan. I mean, I think what he means there is, obviously something that I'm seeing more and more is how do you create agility within, your fundraising discipline? So whether that's events, community, or, within the philanthropy context, how do you kind of plan for, the uncertainty that exists at the moment?
I think that sits with, so Martin, great question, and I agree. And I think that sits within your risk register, for want of a better word. So if, I often, when I'm working with people, will say, okay, if we're thinking about risk, what are the risks of the worst that can happen? So, an example now would be, are we going to have this event in real life or not? And almost having two plans, one for the real life version, one for the blended version, and one for completely online. And perhaps that's come to the fore now because of the circumstances over the last year. But yeah, I often will get people to do a list and have fun with it of what's the worst that can happen. If everything that we could that we lie awake at night worrying about happened, okay, what's the plan B, that if that happens, this is what we'll do? And there's two things with that. One, you get it highlights some things that could happen and you have your mitigation plans in place. But a lot of the time, it helps to take the risk out by owning the worst that can happen and go, well, if that does happen, here's what we're going to do, and just helps that to feel less risky. Howard?
Yeah, nothing really to add to that. Absolutely. Martin's absolutely spot on with that.
Yeah.
Excellent. And then next we have a question from Ruth Joyce. So I have a question on trust fundraising. What do you think will be the main hurdles in this coming year? We found it a mix of some being very supportive and others being very uncertain.
I think lots of grant makers have responded very differently, both institutional and individual or private major donors and their sort of family trusts and so on. Luckily, and I think just looking at the COVID-19 funders database from Charity Excellence, from Ian, Charity Excellence, just the variety of new funds and repurposed funds that sprang up in response this time last year and ongoing, some of them repeating many times, such as the Rousings. Yeah, that's encouraging, and that's certainly helped many organisations. Main hurdles, I suppose it all does come down to how the trust's investments have worked. I know that's mostly been better than I think most people have imagined. So the real sort of falling off of the economy didn't seem to affect most grant makers that I've spotted or read about, but I don't know, someone perhaps could add to that. I think there's also other issues of the possibilities of many grant funders. They've always talked to each other, of course, but many of them are talking to each other about how to address inclusion and diversity, and who are they funding and how, and what mechanisms can they introduce. So again, I don't want to sound Pollyanna-ish, but I'm encouraged by that. So in a way, that's not a hurdle. That's a positive, but it's an element of change that is underway.
And I think that all I'd add to that, I think in terms of the main hurdles, I think is transparency on both sides if something doesn't work and what can be learned from it. So if charities are open about their challenges and trusts are open about hearing them and not just wanting a report that says, yeah, we ticked all the boxes, and that two-way conversation, which I'm starting to see more of, I think that's one of the main hurdles, being apprehensive to say it didn't work or it didn't work because, and being really open about building those relationships, because trusts are your partners in solving the problem.
I just spotted that Damien, who knows more about this than I do, has commented that stock market losses in investment portfolios have mostly recovered now for grant makers. So that's quite encouraging. Yes, looking at dividends restarting because of the proportion of grant makers that rely on that. Thank you, Damien. I do love having the chat. People can just give you so much more detail than you have to hand. Okay, thank you.
And Claire, we've got now a question from Claire, which is, what tips do the panel have for encouraging senior teams to move more quickly on decisions when working in organisations that are very slow to take on new ideas? I think that's a question a lot of people have asked themselves, probably whilst lying in bed, unable to sleep over the last 12 months.
Lucy.
Okay, so I think read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman that I already mentioned. So I think the first thing is senior teams, remember they're trying to keep you safe. As human beings, we're hardwired to survive and stay safe. So that phrase, better the devil you know, is very real. We think that the new thing is going to be more risky than the current thing that we're doing that doesn't work. So just understanding that to start with. And then my practical bit of advice is see everything as a test and get data. So things like, you've got an idea for an event, don't spend loads of time, get the event proposition, who it's for, and the basics together, mock up a web page and say, we're planning this event, are you interested? And get people to sign up and show if they're interested or not, as a way to then say, look, we've got a hunch and we've got some data that shows whether this is going to be successful or not. So I often find that more business cases and financial modelling is a stalling practice. If we because we're scared, we're programmed to stay the same and keep things safe. The more you can do to test as risk-free as possible to get some real data, that helps to build your case to do something. And there is, I get told off for saying this, but there is a case for forgiveness over permission, because if we don't, anything you're trying to do that is new is going to be difficult. Don't assume anyone's going to like it. And sometimes you just have to take a bit of a punt and test it as risk-free as you possibly can to get the data. And that can be scary too.
Absolutely, what Lucy says. It's a mixture of data, but never relying on the data, because although we all believe, just thinking fast and slow, we all believe we're convinced by data. It's the quality of the argument and it's the quality of the people who are doing the persuading and being persuaded that really achieve minds, and that's tricky.
And I thought of one more thing. It's asking them the questions. Okay, so what happens if we don't try it? What does that look like? And is that going to be the best for the reason we exist and our beneficiaries? Is it our job to try the new thing? Because if what we're currently doing is declining, do we have a choice? Yeah, and you probably won't convince them in one conversation or one meeting. It's a longer term thing, which I know in and of itself, if you want to work quickly, is really frustrating.
Fantastic. And I think this next question actually leads on very well from that one, because it's also about a kind of, senior stakeholder engagement and decision making. So the cheapest is often regarded as the tipping point when charities make decisions on which things like acquisition, but it doesn't necessarily always result in the best outcome. How do we develop a more rounded decision-making culture within the sector and consider overall value more effectively to achieve better outcomes, as opposed to simple focused on cost and ROI?
Hi, Vaughan. Great question. Do you want to go first, Howard? Or
I think we may be lucky that attitude, the hair shirt attitude to charity of spending as little as possible is disappearing. I think that's just I hope that's a sort of development of different people, a wider group of people, and perhaps possibly more people with more business experience, or just a different view of what a charity or a social enterprise does. That's kind of my escape from that. Yeah, it's bedeviled charities' growth for years, I think, the decision to be as parsimonious as possible in terms of fundraising budgets. We know if you don't invest in fundraising, you don't get. How do you get senior managers to agree to that? I think that will be, I don't really have a solution, but Vaughan's absolutely right.
Yeah.
It's my question.
The things that I'd add to that is around the focus, what's being measured is not necessarily the best measure, cost and return on investment. It's maybe things around lifetime value, and actually for organisations to have some sort of testing budget, some sort of innovation budget, which is there without an ROI in years 1, 2 or 3 in order to be able to test. So what I was saying about Airbnb, it took 10 years for them to be a multi-billion floated on the stock market company. They got turned down for funding several times by some big investors. They had lots of roadblocks. If there had been a charitable product, that would have, year 1 didn't make any money, we'll kick it out. So I think that there's a graveyard in many charities of ideas and products with great potential that gets kicked out because it's being measured on ROI in 1 year, which isn't necessarily the right measure, especially if it's something new. And think about that early adopter graph. You might be ahead of the curve, but if you don't keep investing at that particular point in time, you're going to miss it when it gets to that sort of mass participation and early majority. And that takes a culture shift and a lot of bravery to keep developing something that we don't even know if it's going to work yet, and not everything will work. That was quite a waffly answer, sorry, but hopefully there was a nugget of help in there.
I'm sure there was. I think there was. Damien, I think if that's the comment, I think that's what he was commenting on. He just posted in the chat. If anyone solves this, sell it. Well, share it first. But if you sell it, you'll probably do very well. Yeah, it's that culture issue is vast. It's such a huge issue. So thank you for sharing, Vaughan. Sorry, I can't answer it, but Lucy did very well. One more question, I think.
Yes, final question, and it is on something that I've been finding is coming up more and more in my conversations. Do you think there is merit in smaller charities with synergy joining forces, so in the not so distant future, as income becomes ever more challenging to acquire through fundraising and or in-person volunteering opportunities reduce? I just want to quickly add a little aside to that before I let you answer. This is something that Andy Burnham, when he opened the Northern Fundraising Conference, was very positive about. So it's certainly an interesting area of growth in the sector, but I'd love to hear both your takes on it.
I'll just jump in and say yes. I mean, that's a huge overgeneralization. Collaboration, particularly sort of sharing expertise, but sharing sort of, I mean, even if it's just at a tech level, back office systems, there's so much duplication. We also know there's so much overlap of supporters. So to me, any efficiencies that can be gained that get beyond charities' sense of their own self-worth, fabulous. And it need not just be limited to smaller charities. I think that kind of approach, the avoidance of duplication is just a fabulous opportunity. I know why there's very good reasons why lots of charities have been set up over the years, but there is definitely room to improve it. And I'm stating the obvious. And I'm really pleased that small charities are getting a really good coverage today, because I just seen Emma following up with another post about the particular issues of getting smaller charity senior staff to invest in fundraising. So yeah. Thank you, Emma, for that. Sorry, Lucy.
Yeah, I agree, where you can reduce costs, but also where you can make it simple for supporters and volunteers to get involved. I mean, I know that, you know, when I talk to people about being a fundraiser and they don't really understand what that is, many times I've had a conversation about different helplines and things. I don't understand what, you know, in the olden days, what does Breakthrough do that's different to breast cancer care? You know, and that has all, now we're looking at breast cancer now. So that's a good model to look at. If it makes it easy for the supporter to go, yes, how can I help? Then that's also another reason why it's good for charities to get together.
And I've just spotted another comment from Emma saying yes 3 times to the idea. And I think using different words as well. So again, too often we think of sort of mergers as perhaps an emergency or a sort of a backstop position, but she's mentioned collaborations, mergers, coalitions, alliances, more for small charities. Absolutely, yeah. Brilliant. Summed up. It doesn't have to be formal merger. It can be many other ways of collaborating, because fundraising to me is about collaboration.
Yeah,
or
and about
to collaborate.
And about solving the problem that needs solving in the way that's most effective.
Indeed. Thank you.
Oh, have we got time for one more? It's just come in from Diana.
A real quickie, because we've got 2 minutes left.
Okay, it's a short one. I really thought that there would be more consolidation of charities as a result of the pandemic, but it's not. But there is not a big, a huge wave. So that's, I think, more a little kind of aside. Thank you very much, Diana.
Yeah, agreed. I was surprised by that as well. Yeah, it may still happen.
Okay, and I think that's it in terms of the questions. So I'm happy to hand over to you, Juliet, if you want to do a wrap up.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Howard and Lucy, and thanks, Gary, for your moral support in the background there. That was an amazing session. Loads of really great tips and takeaways. I could name a lot. For me, one of the key ones is I'm going to do the Van Gogh. Doing more of what I cannot do. I think that's excellent, and lovely to see so much engagement as well. Thanks for everybody for coming along, and thanks for people posting in the chat and adding your questions, and it was lovely. So a big thank you to all, but as I say, especially to Howard, Lucy and Gary. Our next first Thursday event will take place on the 6th of May at 10 a.m. again, and we'll be focusing on the future of legacy giving. So do join us, and in the meantime, stay safe and have a lovely break over Easter. Thank you very much. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Have a good Easter.
Bye.
Bye-bye.